Hi.
Hi.
Will you please introduce yourself
Sure.
and let the Hill residents know who you are and why you're running for selectman?
Sure. My name's Rick Vincent. Lived in town for 25 years. My wife and I raised our two youngest children here. They attended Jenny D. Blake School and then went on to the Franklin schools. I'm running for selectman. I'm currently the interim selectman, so I want to continue in that position with my background, and I'll be real brief about this part. We can get into it more later if you need, but with my background, with 45 years of private industry experience, owning my own business, and about 25 years of government experience. I think my experience qualified me for the seat for selectman.
What do you feel is wrong with the current administration?
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with the current administration. Everybody has good intent, but there are differences of opinion. And that's why you always have an odd number on any kind of board, committee, so that you don't try not to have tied votes. So I don't take one side or the other with one position or one person all the time. I gather the facts, I ask questions, and make the best decision I can, the most educated decision I can. So there are days when I'll vote one way with one person, and another day I'll vote another way with another person. So everybody's got their own opinion, everybody's got their own ideas. So I wouldn't say that there's anything wrong with the current administration. It's just, there's differences of opinion.
Well, what do you plan to do differently?
Well, again, I'll bring my experience. I'll continue, and I do this with my job. So I listen to all the different sides, all the different critiques and questions and whatnot. And I'll ask questions, research what I need to research, and again, come to an educated decision.
Okay. Do you have a criminal record?
No.
Those on fixed incomes are very concerned about taxation going up. Given that municipal operations only account for 25% of our tax bill, how likely is it to find ways to keep taxation reasonable as a select board member?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's a good question for any municipality. It's not just Hill, it's everywhere. I've worked in many towns, and that's always the question, is how to make things affordable for the taxpayer. And you mentioned fixed income. There are programs, and a lot of people surprisingly don't know about these programs. So in my position as an assessor for a town, I've always presented those programs to those that might qualify. So there are elderly exemptions. There are income and asset limits that the applicant would have to meet. So there are elderly exemption programs. There are veterans credits programs. That's for military veterans. There are programs for low-income people. And so I always make sure that we get people that come into the office all the time. It happens in every town I worked in. People come in concerned about making their tax payments. And so I'll usually bring them into my office, close the door, and ask them some questions about their income, their financial status, and see if there's anything that they qualify for. And then I'll work with them to fill out those applications. If they need the help, I'll help them fill out the applications and then process them accordingly. So there's not a lot that we can do as far as the tax amount. Of course, that's all budget related. But for individual people, there's not much we can do. We are required by state statute to assess everybody at market value. There are some exceptions to that too. But everybody's got to pay their fair share unless they qualify for one of these programs or a certain exemption.
So, since Hill has no commercial base to offset taxation, what would you do as a select board member to diversify the tax rate?
Yeah, well, this was brought up at the candidates night, and there's a limited number of commercial property in town. And there are other small options, and it had been mentioned of maybe bringing in some kind of recreation into the town. However, that doesn't really generate any income for the town. And if it does bring in a little income, it doesn't really move the needle at all as far as the budget and tax burden. What you need is something major. And usually when a town is bringing in recreation, it's a larger town, and that's really to bring people into town, and then they go to the stores, they go to the restaurants, they do shopping in town, and that generates income for the businesses in town. We do have one item that would really make a difference, and this was discussed at the candidates night last week as well, and that is trying to recoup the money that the town's supposed to get for the old town, the flood reimbursement money. And I don't want to get into all the details, but we're only getting a fraction of what we're supposed to be getting. And I worked on this back in 2012, worked with a senator to try to get that money returned to the town, and it failed at that time. There was a bill before the Senate to reestablish that reimbursement, and it failed at that time. And Steve Thompson, current Selectman, has been working on that, and I talked to him, I think it was last summer, about that, and told him what I had done back in 2012, and told him I'd be happy to work with him on this to see if we get that money brought back to the town again. So I know he's working on that now, and that would make a big difference. I'm going by memory. We're supposed to get, I think at that time, it was supposed to be $110,000 a year. It was reduced down to $30,000. I think those are the figures. So that's a good chunk of money. That would really make a difference on the tax burden for the taxpayers.
Excluding firehouse, town offices, school, 2 road department buildings, and 10 lots in the village where no road exists, the town owns some 30 properties with an assessed value of $1.7 million. Is it time for the town to start a multiple-year process to sell them in order to offset taxation?
That's something that could be looked at. However, some of those lots we may want to keep. And I believe this was discussed in the past. Some of those lots we may want to keep maybe for gravel purposes in the future, or sand, whatever it might be, that the town could use for road maintenance and whatever else it might be. The other issue, and it depends on the zoning too, what can be done with the properties. The other issue is there's a balance to some of these properties. Do you want to keep them? Do you want to sell them? If they're residential properties and you sell those properties, that's great. We get some income for properties that we may not need. But then, do you want, and I'm not siding one way or another on this, it's really up to the town. Do you want to sell that property where a house may be built and they have children that are going to be going to the school, and so the cost to educate those children is far more than the tax money we're going to receive on the new house. So again, I'm not taking one side or the other, and I've seen this in several towns where they decide not to sell the property because it's really going to cost the town more money than they'll receive in tax revenue.
The town of Hill has no diversity of tax base. If those on fixed incomes, those living paycheck to paycheck, and the children of Hill-born parents are to continue living in Hill, that will have to change. How do you plan to bring commercial interest into town during the short-term 3 years?
Well, again, that goes back to the limited parcels that we have in town that are commercially zoned. So we could advertise those properties, but that's difficult because they're privately owned. There might be 1 or 2 that are town-owned. So there's only so much the town can do to bring in the commercial base. And again, it's a limited number of parcels, and I believe some of those might be in current use or conservation, so that's another issue. That's a difficult question. We did at one time have, for commercial base, for commercial properties and businesses, we had the store. I'm kind of going down Commerce Street. We had the store, and then we had the machine shop, which was then converted to the pizza shop, and a hair salon, which is now I think a 5-family unit, and then Hill Design, and then across the street was the gas station. So out of all those, we only have the store left. The problem is there's just not enough business in town to support all. There's not enough population in town to support all of these businesses. So there's only so much the town can do to bring in business. We can make an effort, but we just can't, unfortunately, mandate that people come into town with their businesses.
The water department seems to have no plan to replace the water mains, which are now over 80 years old. Nor is it addressing the condition of the water tank. It will not be cheap. What will you do as select board member to make sure that the waterworks has effective and devoted commissioners so that the goal happens before catastrophe does?
Great question. I've been giving this a lot of thought. So I have mentioned at the candidates night, I've spoken to a lot of people about this. I mentioned it at some of the selectmen's meetings that there's a reason why I'll mention this. I had mentioned that we had a road committee at one time to prioritize what roads had to be repaired, what sections of the road had to be repaired. And I was thinking about towns that I've worked in, and they had a facilities manager, and the facilities manager would handle basically all the infrastructure, primarily buildings, but they might get involved with some of the other infrastructure as well. So I was thinking about how do we do something like that in town. Now, a facilities manager would be a real expensive position, and I wasn't sure if the town could afford that. And I was speaking with somebody at the transfer station on Saturday when I was there, and he came from a town in Vermont. I think he was on the select board there, and they had an infrastructure committee. So it really is an expansion of what we had as a road committee, and they would handle all of the infrastructure that we have in town and prioritize what needs to be repaired, plan out how much we need to spend on these repairs, and then we're putting money away every year in capital reserves for these repairs. We have to think long-term and short-term and find a way to upgrade all the infrastructure in town that needs to be repaired.